Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is the reaction video to the mostly complete lore of Hollow Knight. Basically the video that was suggested from the first episode in the comments for me to either watch on my own or to do a reaction to it because it's like a very popular video. So yeah, we are watching it today. When it comes to other things that I did not do in the game, like the whole got home, other Pantheons and other endings that are connected to Pantheons, the other ending to the Grim Troop DLC, the Ogrim secret cutscene, the Path of Pain, stuff like that, it's possible that I'm either gonna do it in my own time. Like many lovely people said in the comments, sometimes it's good for this type of game, this hard type of game, to just come back after a couple months and try it again, and it may be just a better experience for me. We'll see. For now, I did as much as I basically wanted to before I would be just angry at the game. Like, I think I stopped at a good time. During Pantheon 3, I actually, in my own time, I got to Sly. So, like, I know that after Zote, that was very angry at the fact that he's there. There was Umu, Hornet, and then Sly. So I already seen Sly and the way he fights, and he was annoying, so I basically gave up again. And at this point I don't have the game. It's uninstalled because I got angry, and also I don't have much space on my PC, so I had to kind of uninstall it. And I just been yapping again for a few minutes. I cannot focus with them. I just cannot. So yeah, it's possible that I either will do this stuff in my own time in the future, or I'm gonna stream it. I know that not everyone likes streaming, but I think it would be cool to do this stuff on stream, maybe possibly. We'll see how quickly I'll regret that, but that's just an idea. Obviously, if I stream this stuff, I'm gonna later upload it as a video on YouTube. We'll see. But for now, the only thing that I'm gonna be reacting to today is the mossbag video. So yeah, let's just start because I've been yapping as always. All right, let's see. Hopefully cats won't be very, very loud because I already had to pause this video a couple of times. This is just what having kids looks like. So let's start. Let's see. Another thing, if you somehow didn't watch this video yet, please watch this video first and then come back to my reaction. I'm gonna link this video in the description box. So yeah, let's start. It's funny start. Warning, this video contains a few spoilers for Hollow Knight. Please bear that in mind before. Yes.
If you were to ask me, what is your favorite video game ever made? I would have to say Cory in the House for the Nintendo DS. But Hollow Knight would be a close second. Hollow Knight was released on February 24th, 2017 by Team Cherry, an indie game studio based in the mythical land of Adelaide, South Australia. Over the past 3 years, Hollow Knight has become an indie darling. The game has sold over 3.5 million copies.
Yeah,
it was the opening game at ADGQ 2019. There's a Hollow Knight book, a line of plushies, t-shirts, nicotine patches, nuclear warheads, and even vinyl records for all you goddamn hipsters. Team Cherry had one goal when making Hollow Knight. They wanted to create a world that allowed players to get completely lost in exploration. We can see this desire in Hollow Knight's design. The levels in Hollow Knight are massive, with secrets and rewards hidden in every nook and cranny, be that powerful charms, special abilities, or the game's navigation system requires the player to work for their map, forcing them to make a stronger mental image of the world in their head. Christopher Larkin's score and Ari Gibson's artwork lend to this as well, creating an atmosphere that the player won't want to leave.
Wyobraź sobie świat nieograniczonych możliwości, gdzie możesz obracać akcje.
People like me fear that the player won't want to leave. But there's one aspect of Hollow Knight that keeps people like me coming back: the world building.
Yeah. I think my favorite thing
When
about
Super
this game
Metroid
is
launched in
probably
1994,
exploration.
it stood out for its amazing sense of immersion.
Never
Now in
played.
1994, I was busy not being alive, but I've watched enough
Same.
YouTube video essays to know that this game was a big deal. In case you didn't know, Super Metroid is basically the granddaddy of all Metroidvanias. That's why they're called Metroidvanias.
Yeah.
Now in Super Metroid, there are moments that give the player a sense of depth. Basically the feeling that this world exists outside of Samus's interactions with it. In the room right before that diabetic crocodile thing, Samus can find the corpse of a random soldier. His inclusion here doesn't change the gameplay at all, but instead gives the player a sense of wonder about the world they are exploring. Who was this guy? Why was he here in the first place? Did he like jazz? Now, finding dead bodies and other random garbage is pretty cool, right? Well, Hollow Knight basically does the same thing, about a dozen times. Through its world building, Hollow Knight turns Hallownest into a living kingdom. You can sense the ancient history of the land when you look at dilapidated structures or giant barred doors. Nothing feels like it was put into the game randomly. There's a reason for it all.
What
Except
about
those reasons
the
aren't the
weird
easiest
egg?
to uncover.
What the fuck is that?
Hollow Knight's narrative
I'm
is
already
buried under
swearing.
layers of NPC
Shit.
dialogue, item descriptions, lore tablets, and even additional content like the Quarrel comic and Fan Gamer's Wanderer's Journal.
Right. I've been told
These
that.
past 3 years have seen an insane amount of research by the Hollow Knight community to make sense of Team Cherry's sprawling world. We've even made it to the point where people are looking at the in-game signs to try and decipher Hallownest's logographic language. In this video, I hope to give you a long and detailed look into the world of Hollow Knight, exploring Hallownest's history and uncertain future. When I'm not busy making surprisingly accurate Super Smash Bros. Roster speculation videos, or insightful podcasts about beloved subjects like the Donkey Kong Country television series, or whatever this was supposed to be, I'm usually making videos about Hollow Knight. And while I am a seasoned Hollow Knight lore expert, I cannot confirm that every musing or theory presented in this video is completely correct.
Yeah.
I highly recommend checking out the lore section of the Hollow Knight wiki if you want a more neutral explanation of Hollow Knight's lore. But if you're too lazy to read, then I suggest you sit back, order some Domino's pizza, or just grab a block of cheese from the fridge
before.
and enjoy the mostly complete lore of Hollow Knight.
Wonder why mostly. Maybe it's because
It's a simple fact of
there's
life
another
that
game
every human
coming.
worships a god, be that technology,
No. Yeah.
ideologies, or in rare cases, God. As it turns out, the bugs in Hallownest pretty much operate in the same way. From the mosskin born from the dream of a giant slug, to the emo kids of the ancient civilization who literally worship the darkness, there is no shortage of things to worship in the world of Hollow Knight. Our story begins with a creature very much worthy of worship, a creature born from the carcass of a worm. The carcass can still be found in the Kingdom's Edge, and it's our only good look at what worms actually looked like. At the
Yeah.
time Hollow Knight occurs, it is suggested there are no worms left in the world. They were incredibly long creatures that featured little to no limbs. Another more mysterious property of worms was that they had some kind of prescience or foresight. Basically, they could see the future to some capacity. It isn't clear how effective this ability was. Considering how the entire race went extinct, this foresight ability must have been pretty shit.
Yeah.
Getting back to this particular worm carcass, it is explained that this worm traveled across the distant mountains and wastelands beyond Hallownest. Once it arrived in Hallownest, the worm died. Except not really. Inside the maw of the carcass sits a pale broken egg, out of which hatched a new form of worm, a being of meager shell. This form of the worm is usually referred to as the Pale King, and he's the character basically responsible for everything that happens in Hollow Knight. The Pale King is a higher being, a type of creature that exists above all others. His body was said to shine with a radiant visage that harmed those who looked upon him. The ultimate goal of the Pale King seemed to be in line with that of other worms. A line from the cryptic Mr. Mushroom reads,
Yeah, I didn't understand.
"Worms pull bugs into their thrall, till ages pass and kingdoms fall." In other words, it's just in their nature. Dogs wag their tails, cats bury their shit, and worms bring massive amounts of bugs into their service in order to form long-standing kingdoms and civilizations. And here in a far corner of the world, the Pale King emerged from the corpse of his former self and began to build his eternal kingdom, Hallownest. There's this one slight problem. There's like people already living there.
Yeah.
The area that would eventually become Hallownest was already filled
Wow,
with
that's so
mantises
cool. No, wait.
there.
It's such a cool map.
The area that would
Look at that. Such a cool... Wow. Who made this? Yeah, I'm wondering, like, what was that? I suppose it was an egg in Hera's, God, it's been some time, so I don't remember the name, but where Hera was. What was that egg? I don't know. I feel like maybe she came from that egg. I don't know.
The area that would eventually become Hallownest was already filled with mantises, bees, moths, spiders, mushrooms, and bush cosplayers. Each of these groups were already operating with their own cultures and societies, and each group had a different interaction with the Pale King. One of the more receptive groups to the arrival of the Pale King were the mushrooms of the fungal wastes. These creatures were able to communicate with one another through one shared mind. The mushrooms viewed this shared mind as a strength, and they were kind of smug dickheads about it. Ultimately, the mushrooms wearily accepted the Pale King's rule, viewing his foresight as a shield to the dangers of the future. Another group living in the fungal wastes is the Mantis tribe. The Mantises have a rich cultural history reaching back to long before the birth of Hallownest. The Mantises are a proud tribe, believing in the importance of proving one's physical strength. The Mantises are fiercely territorial, but will show respect to those who display great power.
Yep.
These Fight Club enthusiasts were led by 4 powerful Mantis Lords, who I guess just kind of sat around waiting for outsiders to challenge them. The Mantis tribe had no interest in the Pale King's kingdom, but the two communities did come to a truce. In exchange for their independence from Hallownest, the Mantis tribe kept the beasts of Deepnest from invading Hallownest. Not sure why they didn't just go out the other exits from Deepnest, but whatever.
Yep.
I'm not an expert on border patrol. I don't work at ICE anymore. Let's move on to Deepnest. Now, many of the different tribes of Hallownest were kind enough to leave lore tablets behind, detailing pretty much everything we need to know about them. Unfortunately, the bugs of Deepnest didn't do that. We know that the spiders of Deepnest had a monarchy because why not? Those are always good, right? Also, within Deepnest are a separate group of spiders that immigrated to Deepnest at some point in the past. This group was known as the Weavers, and they established their own culture and history within Deepnest. They used looms of silk to weave stories, spells, and shields. One thing we know for sure about Deepnest is that they really didn't want anything to do with Hallownest. The struggles of Deepnest-Hallownest relations would become painfully clear as time goes on, but for right now, it seems like the two remained fairly isolated from one another. Another section of pre-Hallownest includes Greenpath. Now, as far as we can tell,
This may be like a boring reaction because most of the things that I think about the game and its lore, I already said in all my videos. So there isn't much else for me to say. I'm just listening basically to his view on things, and many things, they aren't as of now anything that I didn't know. So yeah, I hope it's not very boring because I just don't want to yap without a purpose, just for the sake of yapping.
the mushrooms, mantises, and spiders of Deepnest didn't worship any higher beings. There is this giant mushroom corpse in the fungal core, but I don't think this is a higher being.
Elizabeth.
I mean, who the hell would want to worship a fat-ass mushroom? Fat-ass slugs? Now that's dope. The land we know as Greenpath was created by the higher being known as Un. Un used her great mind to dream the vegetation of Greenpath into the once barren caverns.
Is that the giant slug?
Un's followers, the Mosskin, were also born out of Un's dream, making her their creator. Greenpath at its height was actually much larger than we see in game. At one point, Greenpath stretched into both modern-day Queen's Garden and possibly Fog Canyon.
Yeah.
Greenpath's citizens showed themselves to be a fairly developed society. They built a temple at the Lake of Un in order to worship her. They built a temple at the Lake of Un in order to worship her.
How do you know?
And they even had
it's
their
her?
own line of defense, with Moss Knights showing proficiency in combat, using nails and shells as weapons. The Law of Un continued to remain in effect even after the Pale King arrived, but it seems like they allowed the king to establish a road through their lands, leading travelers to the heart of Hallownest. Hence the name Greenpath. Yeah, Team Cherry really racked their brains when naming this area, didn't they? Next, we have the bees. And while there is no lore on how these bees can turn into fucking drills, or how they can ignore all known laws of aviation, we do know how they reacted to the Pale King. These bugs decided to seal their hive off from the rest of the world, with only patrol bees being able to enter and exit the hive. So yeah, the bees are pretty much pointless in this story. And finally we have the moth tribe. In-game, the only moth settlement is in the resting grounds, but the tribe might have also inhabited the Crystal Peak at one point. Now, as we all know, moths in real life are just complete assholes. As for the moths in Hollow Knight, well, it's a bit complicated. The moth race is described as being a rather pacifist group, with few ever choosing to take up a weapon. During the Pale King's reign, the moth race delved amongst dreams and the dead, displaying the importance of remembering those who have passed, as well as learning how to shape dreams themselves. Similar to the Mothskin, the moth tribe was born from a higher being, known as the Radiance. The Radiance is described as being a light in which the moth tribe basked.
How do we know Un is her? Like, I'm just wondering, because he doesn't provide any proofs, any sources, so I don't know if it's something that I missed in the game. It's something that was said by Team Cherry, in some interviews and such. There's just no source that is added in this video as far as I can see. So yeah, if you know why did he said I already forgot, was a she.
So she was basically is described as being a light in which the moth tribe basked. So she was basically a giant lamp
and
to
they
them.
betrayed her.
Another important aspect about the Radiance is her ties to dreams and a substance known as essence. Essence are the remains of wishes and dreams, and are represented in-game by these dream catcher particle effects. Essence can take the form of whispering roots, as well as dream ghosts, both of which are memories taking root in the world. The Radiance appears to be a creature made of essence, but she isn't the only higher being to give off essence. Un has green particles, the Pale King has gray particles, and this sexy character named Grim gives off fiery red particles.
No.
However, the Radiance appears to be the main god when it comes to dreams, even if other gods also dabble in the dream realm. Getting back to the Moth tribe, it is their interaction with the Pale King that we need to discuss. Basically, the moths turned their backs on the Radiance completely in order to worship the new light that had appeared, the Pale King's light. So yeah, moths are assholes in this game too. With her tribe forsaking her, the Radiance moths are assholes in this.
Kinda didn't realize Markoth was a moth. I guess he's insinuating that Markoth is a moth.
This game too. With her tribe forsaking her, the Radiance became a forgotten memory, a remnant of the past, and a thing that's definitely not going to come up again later in this video. And so the Pale King's new kingdom was established, Hallownest. But there is one aspect of Hallownest that we need to discuss. Unfortunately, to better understand this, we're going to have to read some poetry.
No.
In Wilds Beyond they speak your name with reverence and
the
regret.
first.
For none could tame our savage souls, yet you the challenge met. Under palest watch you taught, we changed. Base instincts were redeemed. A world you gave to bug and beast as they had never dreamed. This is from a poem titled Elegy for Hallownest, written by Motomon the Teacher. The poem appears at the beginning of every playthrough, and hints at what the Pale King and his kingdom offered. Much of the land outside of Hallownest appears to be a wasteland, where bugs survive off of instinct, without the burden of mind. Hallownest somehow taught these bugs and tamed their savagery.
Yeah.
Basically, the Pale King changed the instincts of his subjects, and granted them higher thought. To get a better picture of this, let's look at two different characters, Boone and Tuck.
Who's
These
Boone?
adorable panda bugs get
Who's
two different
Boone?
characters, Boone and Tuck.
Boone? Who is that? Huh?
These adorable panda bug things give us a clear display of Hallownest's effect. While both appear to be the same species of bug,
Oh, it's from the comic.
give us a clear display of Hallownest's effect. While
Yeah.
both appear
Ready almost. Thank you, Boone.
to be the same species of bug, Boone is dumb as a sack of rocks,
What does it
struggling
think?
to
What
string
does it
together
seek?
words, while Tuck speaks fairly clearly. The main difference between these two characters is that while Boone lives outside of Hallownest, Tuck lives beneath the city's capital. Basically, it appears as though Hallownest is a literal holy ground that raises the intelligence of those who dwell within. The Pale King established a path, starting from the kingdom's entrance in King's Pass, winding through Greenpath and the fungal wastes, and finally ending at the massive capital at Hallownest's heart. We now know the capital city as the City of Tears, but that was likely not its original name. The rain that falls down onto the city from the blue lake above didn't begin until after the kingdom collapsed. So unless the capital was originally named by some edgy literature student, the name City of Tears wouldn't have made much sense. The king's motivation for all this appears to have been his desire to be worshipped. The citizens of Hallownest believe that—
like I was saying bad stuff about the king because even though I know he wanted to give the bugs a free will and stuff, it still didn't feel like I don't know really how to explain it. It just didn't feel like Pale King was a good person, was a good being. He didn't really care about these bugs. It was more like he wanted to be worshipped. I mean, he entered this world, this Hallownest, with beings being already there. So he kind of had to offer something to be worshipped, for other bugs to welcome him in this world. I don't know, that's just how I see this.
for all this appears to have been his desire to be worshipped.
Yeah.
The citizens of Hallownest believe that the Pale King created the world and everything in it. Shrines to the king can be found scattered throughout the kingdom, and king's idols were created and distributed to followers of the king. Despite the worship, the Pale King often kept himself hidden from his subjects, possibly to hide his blemishes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the size of the real Pale King to his statue in the ancient basin, the man is clearly overcompensating.
Yeah.
The Pale King's White Palace was also built underneath the city.
I'm also
clearly
like a lot of times I just was talking about why there's so many descriptions of him being like this crazy good looking bug when in reality he's very basic looking, which is probably like this kind of, I don't know how to explain it, like it's this illusion, like the way some people view celebrities, even though they are the same looking as us, they kind of see it as some other worldly beings, some people, which is very weird, but it may be like this similar thing. Many of these bugs probably have never actually seen the Pale King. They just heard about him and saw his statues and those little relics and stuff, and based on that they had their opinions about him, the way they viewed him, which was that he was like this beautiful and shining, whatever else they thought about him. I don't remember the actual wording that they were using for him, but yeah, in reality he was just basic looking bug, just like basically everyone else in Hallownest. He was not special looking at all. Like there's many other bugs that looked much more impressive than him.
Compensating. The Pale King's White Palace was also built underneath the city, separating him from his subjects even more so. At the same time, certain powers became shunned in Hallownest, though we don't know for sure if the Pale King had anything to do with this. Lifeblood is a blue liquidy substance that leaves those who drink it feeling refreshed. However, the use of lifeblood was seen as a taboo, and those who used it were demonized as heretics. The use of soul for combat was also shunned.
Apparently there's a
demonized as
creature, not here, in the other end, not in the core, in the heart. Don't remember, was this the heart and the other one was core, but behind this door in the abyss, apparently there was a creature blinking in the background, which is very interesting because we don't know much about lifeblood. Like, what exactly is the source? I mean, we know this is the heart, the other one is a core, but I don't know, I personally don't really understand much about lifeblood, and I think it's like on purpose because there isn't much information about that. But you know, there's a Silk Song coming someday. Someday. We really thought it's gonna be revealed in June, but someday there will be Silk Song coming, and it's probably gonna have a lot of explanations on things that happen in Hollow Knight but wasn't really well explained. So I cannot wait.
Heretics. The use of soul for combat was also shunned. Soul is a sort of life force in Hollow Knight that animates the bodies of living creatures. But some characters are able to control the soul of others to conjure powerful spirits. But aside from a few exceptions,
were those snail shamans made in Soul Sanctum? I assume so, because of that one snail in the Soul Sanctum. I assume they were made there. Like, I don't think they were just born this way to be able to control soul. They're probably like maybe captured, or they were doing this on their own, like their free will, and they're experimenting on in Soul Sanctum with the Soul Master and such. And the snail shaman's whole family basically was there, but also they're in couple different places. Like, she said that she's bound to this place, like she cannot leave her little home in Forgotten Crossroads. And there's just a lot of places, not a lot of places, because the other one is in Crystal Peak and the other in Green Path or Queen's Gardens, I don't remember. But there just feels like all of these snail shamans were bound to this one place, and some of them have died. Only this one is left. It's interesting with the snail shaman.
Of others to conjure powerful spirits. But aside from a few exceptions, no citizens of Halnest ever used this power. However, the Pale King didn't rule alone. There was another higher being in the mix, a being known as the White Lady.
And basically
the White
Mother
Lady
Nature.
is a weird brute-like being that can be found in the modern-day Queen's Gardens. She is encased in a strange cocoon, and we know very little about her. With as much exposition we get for the Pale King, there is next to nothing on the White Lady. But one thing we do know is that she likes to breed. Like, a lot. The White Lady would often retreat to the Queen's Gardens, an area of land once controlled by the Mosskin. How exactly she walked around and actually went places is a lore question too deep for even my expertise. The White Lady is also known as a pale being, along with the Pale King. What exactly are pale beings? Well, we don't know for sure, but they seem to stand out even amongst higher beings, as being even more powerful. I know that's a little confusing, so let's try using an example. I'd say that regular higher beings are like a TP-Link Archer C7 AC1750 wireless dual-band gigabit router, while pale beings are like the Asus RT-AX88U AX6000 dual-band 8X gigabit Wi-Fi router. Under the Pale King, Halnest underwent a bit of an industrial revolution. He ordered the construction of the stagways, which were used to transport passengers and goods. The Forgotten Crossroads and the storerooms above the City of Tears were used to store goods that traveled along these stagways. The king also ordered the construction of the tramways, because literally no one is safe from the threat of automation. A tram was built between the Forgotten Crossroads and the resting grounds. A second tram was built from the kingdom's edge across the ancient basin over to Deepnest.
God, imagine how
and
big
then a third tram was started in Deepnest and attempted to go further into Deepnest. Not sure how useful that would have been to the bugs of Halnest, but whatever. The Pale King's a smart guy. I'm not gonna question him. But anyway, the Pale King's super smart plan to build a tram in Deepnest ended up getting a few of his tram workers killed. The bugs of Deepnest rejected the Pale King's attempt to build a tram in their territory, further cementing the poor relations shared between the two groups. Aside from convenient fast travel, regular pathways were also used to cart goods around the kingdom. From this was born probably one of the most important groups in Halnest, and perhaps even all of fiction. An elusive guild of bugs, simply known as the Menderbugs, took to maintaining the various signs scattered throughout Halnest. From the journal entry of one Menderbug, we can catch a glimpse into their ancient and unknowable minds.
Yeah, I never got to see him.
Dear diary, isn't life just the most beautiful thing? Fixing signs, mending posts, let them break, I say. I'm a better mender for all that repairing. I sometimes doubt there's a single bug in all of Halnest happier than me.
Another example of the Pale King's expanding infrastructure is the Crystal Peak. This area is filled with crystals that grow rapidly along walls, ceilings, and even the shells of certain bugs. These crystals were considered valuable to the bugs of Hallownest, resulting in large-scale mining efforts. We don't actually see the crystals used anywhere else in Hallownest, but they are said to contain a sort of energy. The crystals are also said to sing, if you listen very carefully.
I knew he was gonna put some stupid music.
In
I
terms of
already get his
military,
humor.
Hallownest's first line of defense appeared to be a group simply known as the Five Great Knights. The members of this esteemed coalition were Ogrim, Hagamol, Zamir, Drya,
How do you know these names?
and Isma. For being so important,
Isma. I
most of
know
the
this from the
information about
comments.
these knights has been lost to time. Ogrim is the knight we know the most about, since he is one of the few knights still alive during the events of the game. Ogrim expressed a great amount of loyalty towards the king, and he maybe had something going on with Isma, but we really don't know. Hagamol was known for his sense of humor and his soft-spoken voice.
How do you know?
But at the same time, he was also dummy thick. Mysterious Samir arrived in Hallownest from a serene land, bringing with her a collection of delicate flowers. At some point, she also got into a relationship with a mantis, but not just any mantis, a daughter of one of the mantis lords. So yeah, it seems like these great knights were slaying in more ways than one.
Yeah.
All we really know about Drya is that she was fierce, caring, and wise. As for Isma, she was described as being kind.
How do we know that?
She also appears to be some
Kim
sort
Cherry?
of weird plant life form, but there's no information on where she's from or what her powers
Or
were.
maybe after I
The Five
defeat
Great Knights play an
Ogrim.
important role in the Champion's
this
Call,
stuff?
the Knotted Grove, and the Battle of the Black One.
Yeah. What was
We
the...
have no idea what these events were or how they affected Hallownest,
Okay.
but they sound cool nonetheless.
Battle
During
of the
Hallownest's
Black
reign,
Worm.
there was another strange area that seemed to exist separate
Silksong?
from the Pale King's rule. Carved out of the corpse of an ancient bug, an area called the Colosseum of Fools was constructed, and it was a destination for warriors from outside Hallownest. The sole purpose for fighting in the Colosseum
Outside.
appeared to be simply
Yeah,
for
they
glory,
look like foreigners.
with a mysterious figure known as the Lord Fool overseeing the combat. We don't know when the Colosseum was constructed or if the Pale King was involved, but one of his servants, the Pale Lurker, became a champion in the Colosseum, perhaps indicating the Pale King's approval. And finally, there was the Royal Waterways, where the fecal excrement of the kingdom was washed out into the fungal
lovely.
wastes. This area saw the rise of a species of parasite-like creatures called the Flukes. The Flukes spawned from the Fluke Marm, a giant monster with cavities in which tinier Flukes live. There really isn't too much
Cavities.
lore involved with the Flukes, but I do need to point out that the Fluke Marm is canonically a MILF. Like, that's not even debatable. The sky is blue, 2 + 2 = 4, and we all want to fuck this thing.
Ew.
And so this was the kingdom of Hallownest at its height. Hallownest was a vast kingdom connected by a network of stagways and tram stations. The bugs of Hallownest mourned their dead on the resting grounds, engaged in commerce using Geo, the de facto currency of the region, and a thriving capital located in the middle of the kingdom. The Pale King had succeeded in crafting a full-blown society, but we all know there are pitfalls to living in a society. As a suspiciously knowledgeable hunter points out in his journal, the Pale King had created a population of weak and pathetic creatures. The bugs of Hallownest did not hunt for their own food, and had become pathetic creatures. The bugs of Hallownest that King had created a population.
So yeah, like the slug made mosskin type of beings. The radiants made moth type beings. What else? The mushrooms. The bees. So pale worm, the Pale King is responsible for these type of bugs, right? I wonder why are they the weak and pathetic creatures? Because I think there was some description about them. They never needed hunt for food because they were living in time of luxury. So when that luxury was taken away from them, probably like when the kingdom has fallen, I guess kingdom had fallen, English, when king died, right? right? I don't know, actually. And when that happened, the bugs were basically just, like he said, weak and pathetic creatures because they're not used to living like that.
Of weak and pathetic creatures. The bugs of
The
Hallownest did
Grimm
not
made
hunt
their
for their
own
own
tribe.
food and had become complacent with their comfort. This is
Yeah.
even more obvious with the east wing of the capital. These greedy members of Hallownest's high society became complete cowards, obsessed with riches and plum from
This
excess
one, yeah.
wealth. The bugs living in Hallownest Prime looked quite different than the
Which
instinctive
kind of says things about Pale King. Like, they kind of probably mirror him, the way he is. Like, he made a whole species that's weak and, you know, just strives to be rich and live luxuriously, you know? It kind of maybe mirrors Pale King. I don't know, I feel like I'm a Pale King hater. Number one hater here. I just don't like any of the higher beings. I mean, Slug didn't do anything that I know of. I don't know, but Radiance and Pale Worm is just, I don't know, they feel like terrible beings.
simpletons they once were. And Hallownest Prime looked quite different than the instinctive simpletons they once were.
Oh,
They're obsessed with riches and plum from excess wealth. The bugs living in Hallownest Prime looked
Hallownest
quite different than the
Prime?
instinctive simpletons they once were. Their savagery had been replaced with intelligence, and through that intellect, they gave the Pale King the devotion and service he desired.
yeah, I guess.
And while there were a few snags along the way, they were shining times for the king and his subjects. Resting at the threshold of Hallownest is a strange lore tablet, proclaiming Hallownest to be the last and only civilization.
Lies.
It calls Hallownest an eternal kingdom. This appears to have been the Pale King's goal, for Hallownest to stand against a wasted world as a final beacon for civilization. And that was the Pale King's ultimate folly, to think that he could succeed where so many others had failed before. Long before the Pale Kings or the Barry Bensons of the world, the land of Hallownest was controlled by an ancient caste. Hints of Hallownest history are littered throughout the land,
The
with the
ancient
most
eggs.
notable examples being the soul totems and arcane eggs. One sect
Arcane
of these
eggs.
ancient bugs didn't worship a god like the Pale King or any lord, but instead a dark and mysterious substance known as the Void. This ancient caste once also tried to lay claim to the entire land of Hallownest, but they too failed. In his quest to conquer all of Hallownest, the Pale King had made an enemy long forgotten, an enemy that was about to be remembered.
So how he did
I
make
mentioned
babies?
earlier that the Moth tribe entirely
of
forgot
the
about the
void.
Radiance in order to worship
Like
the Pale
us.
King, but that isn't quite true. Memories of her still lingered, and hushed whispers of faith kept the Radiance alive. At the summit of the Crystal Peak, a location known as Hallownest Crown, a strange collection of glyphs can be found. Joining these glyphs is a statue of the Radiance, presiding over the kingdom below. This old summit is the sole standing shrine left to the Radiance. This was built in order to keep the memory of the Radiance alive. The Radiance's light began to appear in the dreams of Hallownest citizens. This light manifested itself in an infection that ravaged through the kingdom's tunnels. Those infected would fall into a deep sleep and awaken with broken minds. Some of the lesser bugs tried to resist the Radiance's light, which only resulted in them being consumed by it even more so. Many infected bugs lost their wills and began attacking bugs that weren't infected. The infection also twisted the bodies of its hosts, causing them to bloat and occasionally develop orange cysts on their bodies. For many victims, they were reverted back to their basic instincts, carrying out the duties they once fulfilled in life, but now as mindless slaves. Those caught up in the infection were linked into the Radiance's hive mind, allowing her to control their bodies if needed. As the infection spread across Hallownest, many groups looked to solutions to fight off the Radiance's light. The gates to the City of Tears were closed in an attempt to keep the infection from reaching the city. The stagways were also shut down at some point, and many of the stags eventually died out, but some took more proactive efforts against the infection. The scholars of the Soul Sanctum decided to harness the power of Soul in an attempt to fight the infection. This resulted in the deaths of hundreds of bugs, whose souls were sucked out and injected into the bodies of the scholars. Their goal was to achieve some kind of pure focus, which would somehow protect them from plagues of the mind.
Like Soul Sanctum, it just reminds me of Bloodborne. Very, very much so.
Kind of pure focus into the bodies of the scholars. Their goal was to achieve some kind of pure focus, which would somehow protect them from plagues of the mind. The scholars' leader, the Soul Master, was driven mad by the sheer power of Soul, and his entire sect failed to avoid infection. But hey, at least they took as many innocent people down with them as they could. The Mantis tribe, showing a stronger will than the common bug, were able to stave off the infection. However, one of the 4 Mantis Lords turned against his sisters. He and his followers took in the infection willingly, as it gave them more strength and courage. At some point during all this, the Traitor Lord and his followers were exiled from the Mantis village, eventually taking up residence in the Queen's Gardens. The Traitor Lord's daughter ended up dying at some point. This is the same Mantis that was in a relationship with Zamir, one of the 5 Great Knights, but the Mantises rejected their union because of Zamir's outsideness. As a gamer, this type of prejudice is all too familiar, and honestly, it makes me sick. With the 5 Great Knights completely useless to fight against the infection, the Pale King devised his own scheme. A scheme involving a strange substance known as Void. The Pale King devised his own.
What is this place? I never saw... I don't think I've seen this room before.
Own scheme. It's completely useless to fight against the infection. The Pale King devised his own scheme. A scheme involving a strange substance known as Void. As I mentioned earlier, the Pale King's White Palace was built in an area called the Ancient Basin, but his castle wasn't the only noteworthy thing down there. At the bottom of the Ancient Basin was the entrance to a pit, known as the Abyss. Within the Abyss was a lake composed of void. The Pale King realized that this void could be given form, as evidenced by an imprint of such deep within the Abyss, possibly left there by the ancient civilization that predated Hallownest. The Pale King devised a workshop in his palace, where he placed void in armor shells imbued with soul, creating servants known as King's Molds and Wing Molds. These void creatures were somehow imprinted with the desire of the Pale King.
Can someone let me know what is this room? Is this like from Path of Pain? I don't know, I've never seen that. That's so interesting.
Soul, creating servants known as King's Molds and Wing Molds. These void creatures were somehow imprinted with the desire of the Pale King, so that they would serve him. It isn't clear when the Pale King started making these creatures. There is evidence to imply that even common bugs were aware of King's Molds, but the point is, the Pale King turned to the void in order to create another creature, one that he believed could contain the Radiance and her infection. He tried to create a pure vessel. The Radiance's infection needs its host to have a will and a mind in order to enslave it. A pure vessel would be a creature made of void designed to lack those features. The Pale King believed that by harnessing the void inside a pure vessel, he would be able to stop the infection and keep Hallownest lasting eternal. But his method for creating this so-called pure vessel was incredibly cruel. This is where the White Lady and her King Kong-sized libido come into play. These two higher beings engaged in a union of some kind, resulting in the creation of several eggs that were dropped down into the abyss. There, the void seeped into these eggs, corrupting the offspring of the Pale King and the White Lady. This act resulted in the creation of the vessels. The vessels are not technically considered to be alive. They are shells created from the Pale King and White Lady that have been filled with the void. Within each vessel is a shade, a completely void being hidden behind the face of the vessel. Vessels are also non-gendered, I guess because they're dead or something? I'm not sure if that's how that works, but whatever. I'm not an expert on these kinds of things. I don't work at ICE anymore. Thousands of vessels were created during this process, but only one was chosen as the pure vessel. This particular vessel, chosen by the Pale King, was deemed the Hollow Knight, and was taken away to the White Palace. But I want to take a bit of a closer look at this part of the story. There are a number of questions and theories surrounding this moment that I really want to dig into. The big question surrounding this moment is, why was the Hollow Knight chosen over any other vessel? One common theory is that the Pale King took these vessels back to the White Palace and evaluated them using his giant collection of buzzsaws.
Wyobraź sobie świat.
This theory is probably the least likely explanation.
But also,
it
how
kinda
was
exists
that
just to explain the
White
buzzsaws.
Palace made? You know, because you kind of have to access it using the Dream Nail in like the highest form. How was this White Palace made? Like with whose help? Was this just Pale King that was able to create this whole place? Because that is a not normal place that you can just build like all the other places. It's very interesting. It's like a magical dreamlike place, which is interesting that the Pale King was able to do that.
Likely explanation. It kinda exists just to explain the buzzsaws, which is quite the mystery, I'll admit, but doesn't really mesh with the vessels very well. How does being good at Super Meat Boy prove that you are a worthy vessel? And while thinking about logistics in a game about magic bugs is never a good idea, how exactly did the Pale King transfer these thousands of vessels to his palace without characters like the Dung Defender finding out? So this means that the Pale King probably made his decision without taking any of the vessels out of the abyss.
Yeah.
So how did the Pale King make his evaluation? I think the best explanation comes from a theory I originally heard from a user named Golden Flower Fan. Basically, the vessels were hatched down at the bottom of the abyss, and the first one to make it to the top was chosen by the Pale King. In a memory of this event, we see vessels falling from above back down into the pit of the abyss. Perhaps these vessels weren't being cast down into the abyss, but fell while trying to escape out of it.
Makes sense.
The lore tablet outside the abyss
Focal.
appears to support this theory. It reads, "Our pure vessel has ascended. Beyond lies only the refuse and regret of its creation. We shall enter that place no longer." This tablet was likely written right after the Hollow Knight was chosen, considering that is when the entrance to the abyss was sealed off. The tablet proclaims that the pure vessel has ascended, or in other words, climbed out of the abyss. And while cut content should never be considered canon, I would just like to point out that an earlier version of this tablet, found in the game's code, was even more explicit about this. It read, "From below, our pure vessel has ascended." But how does making it to the top of the abyss first prove that the Hollow Knight is somehow a perfectly hollow vessel?
Perseverance.
Well, I think this
I don't
whole
know.
concept might just be a misconception. What if the Hollow Knight wasn't any different from the other vessels?
And
All the
that he
vessels were made in
failed.
the exact same way after all. The idea that the Hollow Knight was somehow more hollow than the other vessels comes from the fact that there were so many vessels created in the first place.
What is this?
If they
Cutscene?
only needed one, then why create so goddamn many? I mean, this is like Octomom on steroids. Well, these are bugs we're talking about, so it would make sense that multiple offspring would come from one egg.
And White Lady was
And it
just
might have
crazy.
been a precaution to produce multiple vessels in hopes that at least one would be able to successfully escape the abyss. Now another explanation could be that the Pale King just yeeted other vessels that made it to the top first, after determining that they weren't hollow, which would better
True.
explain why so many were created. Ultimately, the exact details aren't super important, but I do find it interesting how many different interpretations can be pulled from this part of the lore. After the Hollow Knight was chosen, the Pale King
For
sealed
me,
the
I don't think I voiced that, but when I saw the falling down, the other vessels that fell, I was kind of thinking that he was tossing them back in because they failed at becoming pure vessels. That's the way I thought, but kind of makes more sense. I mean, not that it kind of makes more sense. I kind of just prefer the fact that they tried to climb up just like we did, but they failed at some point and they fell back down.
from this part of the lore. After the Hollow Knight was chosen, the Pale King sealed the doorway to the abyss, leaving the discarded vessels to rot away in darkness. These actions were not taken lightly by the Pale King or the White Lady. Both participants expressed shame in what they did, but saw no other option to save the kingdom. But the vessels weren't the only poor saps sealed away in the abyss. There's also a lighthouse that was built on top of a naturally
Yeah, and there
formed
are
spire,
other bugs there.
its light shining down on an
Also,
ocean of
in
abyss
the
below.
lighthouse.
Inside was one of the Pale King's royal retainers, who was left in charge of keeping the lighthouse turned on. So this brave soul was willingly sealed in a dark and dangerous tomb for the rest of his life, just so he could not pull a lever. Well, at least he was living with purpose. With the abyss sealed and the hollow
Also, no eyes, because no eyes also has this void, just darkness coming out of her eyes. I wonder how she is connected to all of this. Like, what is with her? Like, how did the void come to her? To no eyes.
Knight chosen, the Pale King's plan was beginning to come together. The Hollow Knight was raised and trained to prime form, causing it to grow several times its original size. We don't know exactly why this happened, but I
Especially
guess the
because
Hollow
Pale
Knight is
King
just
is
a
small.
grower and not a shower.
But
We know that
White
the
Lady
Hollow
is
Knight was
big.
trained to use a nail, but why was this even necessary?
Oh,
One
that's a good
possible
one,
explanation
probably.
is that the Hollow Knight needed to protect itself in case an intruder tried to kill it. You know, like the player. Or perhaps this was important in the process of containing the Radiance. Unfortunately, the details of that are never fully explained. The Hollow Knight might have somehow focused the Radiance
Not everything
inside
can be
itself,
explained. Some
but Team
things are
Cherry
just
gives
game
us no
stuff.
explanation of how that might have worked. But that still wasn't enough for the Pale King. Additional seals were needed in order to protect the Hollow Knight's physical body while the Radiance was trapped inside of it.
Yeah.
To achieve this, the Pale King sought the help of 3 particular bugs, who would later be known as the Dreamers: Lurien the Watcher, Motomon the Teacher, and Hera the Beast. Lurien is definitely the most mysterious of the 3 Dreamers.
We don't know much about him.
He lived in the Watcher's Spire in the City of Tears. From there, Lurien watched over the city with his telescope. Lurien was a pretty
Watching
big fan
chickens.
of the king, so it probably took little convincing for him to lie down for him. Lurien might also be tied to another strange
What?
convincing for him. Lurien was a pretty big fan of the king, so it probably took little convincing for him to lie down for him. Lurien might also be tied to another strange incident that occurred in the City of Tears. Hidden on some of Lurien's lore tablets are images of jars, the same jars that can be found stockpiled in the Tower of Love. This building sits on the outskirts of the city, and is the setting of one of the most bizarre bosses in the game, the Collector.
My favorite.
The Collector is a void construct that appears to have been made from the same mold,
It's time.
Yeah.
the Collector.
Yeah, it makes sense for the collectors to be connected to the void because they're just shades without the shell.
The Collector is a void construct
They're
that appears to have
constructs.
been made from the same mold used to create the King's molds. But the Collector is unique because,
Why?
well,
Good grief, he's naked!
the Collector stayed in the Tower of Love with a noble bug who likely owned the establishment. In the tower, a number of bugs can be found captured in jars, implying that these two were tasked with collecting these creatures. However, the
Why?
Collector somehow became
so,
obsessed with
just-
grubs, creating a map to keep track of grubs it captured in jars, as well as keeping a strange shrine displaying a
never saw
grub in the
that.
style of the Vitruvian Man.
It's like a hidden
Eventually,
room,
the bug
probably.
staying with the Collector decided to lock it inside the Tower of Love, and fled to the Queen's Gardens, where it died, likely due to overexposure to the void. Despite
So
being locked up
interesting.
in the tower, the Collector is still spotted by the Hunter at some point, which either means this only happened recently, or the Hunter has been farting around in Hallownest for a long-ass time. We have no idea what these creatures were trying to do. It's implied that the Collector was trying to preserve the creatures of Hallownest, perhaps trying to protect them from the spread of the infection, but we don't know where the Collector's obsession with grubs originated. And while Lurien does seem connected to all of this, we don't know how involved he was with this operation, or what its end goal exactly was. Motomon the Teacher lived in the Teacher's Archives, a library built atop a lake of acid in the Fog Canyon. The lower half of her body consists of tentacles, making her a popular subject for the thriving Hollow Knight R34 community.
Oh my God.
The Archives and the Fog Canyon as a whole are also filled with these strange Metroid knockoffs. These creatures are likely related to Motomon in some way. They could be her live offspring, her test tube babies, or possibly even her shit. Moldamon uses futuristic cathode ray tube things to store information about Halonest. Several terminals in the teacher's archive go into detail about the Pale King's plan to defeat the Radiants, indicating that Moldamon had intimate knowledge of what she was taking part in. Finally, the Pale King sought the help of Hera the Beast, the Queen of Deepnest. Now, as I mentioned earlier, relations between Halonest and Deepnest were kinda not great. Unlike the other two dreamers, Hera needed to be convinced in order to help the Pale King. Hera would eventually agree to become a dreamer, in exchange for a child.
Like, why did she want
The Pale King agreed, and the two engaged in a dalliance, which is a fancy way of saying they totally boned. The White Lady was okay with this arrangement. In fact, she might have been watching from the closet. The motive behind Hera's request is never elaborated on, but it appears as though the King of Deepnest was dead at this point. Hera was a common bug, so perhaps she desired the King of Deepnest was dead at this quest is never elaborated on, but it appears as though the King of Deepnest was dead at this point. Hera was a common bug, so perhaps she desired the Pale King's pale seed so that her child could be of high birth. The bargain between Hera and the Pale King resulted in the birth of Hornet. She became known as the gendered child because, unlike the Pale King's other children, Hornet was not hollowed out by the Abyss. Hera and Hornet spent little time together, as Hera had to make good on her end of the bargain. And so the three dreamers were put to rest. Through their actions, a seal was placed over the black egg, prohibiting entrance into the chamber. These dreamers also had their own protection. At the base of Lurian's spire, the Watcher Knights guarded access to their master's body. Modamon's body was protected by a giant jellyfish named Umu. On top of this, Modamon entrusted her servant Quirrell with a mask which would be required to break an additional seal she had placed over herself. So she basically is double wrapping herself. As for Hera, we're not really sure what protected her, since it is never actually seen in-game.
Weird.
We don't know where this creature is hiding, but whoever it is, they really suck at their job. Now there appears to be one more element to the Pale King's plan, involving the Weavers. Hidden away in the Weaver's Den is an incomplete seal of binding, woven from silk. This design prominently features the Hollow Knight's head, and can be found in the White Palace, as well as blocking the exit during the Hollow Knight fight. Silk spools created by the Weavers can be found in the Stag Station in Deepnest, as well as the Stag Station next to the White Palace. These spools can also be found in the Pale King's workshop. We know that the Weavers were closely tied to Hera and Hornet, so their actions might have been a part of the deal between the Pale King and Hera. Once the Hollow Knight was ready, the Radiance was somehow channeled into the vessel, which was then placed inside of a giant black egg located in the Forgotten Crossroads. This egg was built to sustain the Hollow Knight, and itself appears to be fashioned from void. The Hollow Knight was chained up, and the entrance to the black egg was locked behind a powerful seal created by the three dreamers. Initially, this convoluted plan actually worked, and the infection was successfully contained.
I wonder for
Memorials
how long
to the Hollow Knight and the Dreamers were erected in the City of Tears and the Resting Grounds. But this is the part of the story where things get a little bit hazy. By the time these statues were constructed, citizens had taken to writing on parchment woven from spider silk, which was all destroyed when water started pouring down onto the city. We don't know how long the Hollow Knight was able to completely contain the infection. Bugs from Dirtmouth used to go to the Temple of the Black Egg to pray, saying they felt at peace within the walls. But after a while, they stopped going, perhaps indicating that the infection was beginning to leak out again. The infectious air continued to seep through Halonest for years, eventually even reaching the deepest parts of the kingdom. As it turns out, the Pale King's pure vessel wasn't quite so pure after all.
I kind of don't understand what Loskin or the other one in Green Path that Hornet probably killed when we first fought her. Kind of don't understand what were they doing there? Like, does it mean that after, because Hollow Knight succeeded at coming out of the abyss, and the way was sealed, how did our character came out of the abyss if that was sealed? Or this character, Lost Kin, or the other one. Like, how did we came there, from there? How did we end up in King's Pass? I don't really get that.
Eventually even reaching the deepest parts of the kingdom. As it turns out, the Pale King's pure vessel wasn't quite so pure after all. The Hollow Knight had been tarnished by an idea instilled. While the game never explicitly tells us what that idea was, it does hint strongly at what it might be. Hidden away in the White Palace is a memory showing the Hollow Knight and the Pale King sharing a moment. The Hollow Knight might have developed a parental bond to the Pale King, and who could blame it? The Pale King is a pretty great dad after all. You know, if you ignore the infanticide and everything. Remember those smug mushroom dickheads? Well, it turns out their trust in the Pale King was a complete mistake. That shared mind isn't looking too good now, is it? In the fungal core, the corpse of a giant mushroom lies dormant. Its final thoughts were, "Pale worm, what good to see a demise unavoidable?" This could imply that the Pale King always knew that his kingdom was doomed. All he could do was delay the inevitable. This is likely the moment when Hallownest as it once was entirely collapsed. The Hollow Knight had not completely stopped the infection, and while it may have taken a while, Hallownest was eventually brought low. It's at this point that characters and areas begin to resemble as we know them in-game. When it became clear that the Hollow Knight was not able to contain the Radiance, the Pale King resorted to his final plan. He fucked off, hiding himself, his White Palace, and his Pale Court in the Dream World.
Oh, so the White Palace before was a normal place. After some time, he changed it into Dream version. That's interesting. And I wonder how it works.
All of the furniture in the palace was covered under white sheets, similar to how people in the real world cover their furniture while away on long trips. The palace was also completely covered with thorns and buzzsaws, similar to how people in the real world cover their houses with thorns and buzzsaws. The Pale King would eventually pass away while sitting on his throne in the White Palace. There's
like
no
that?
confirmation on what killed him, but there are a few things to consider. The throne room is incredibly dark compared to the rest of the palace, and the particle effects and ambient track in this room are identical to that of the Abyss. All of the king's molds surrounding the Pale King are dead.
Wyobraź sobie, że w kieszeni ma...
The ancient basin itself also has become stained with the presence of void, as it can be seen as high as the rundown elevator shaft leading back to the city. Remember that bug that was sealed away in the Abyss to make sure the lighthouse wasn't turned off?
Yeah.
Well, the lighthouse was turned off.
Yeah.
I guess that whole living with purpose thing is a crock of shit after all. It seems as though the Sea of Void itself actually convinced this bug to betray his king and turn off the lighthouse. Now I know what you're thinking. Exactly how conscious is the Void? Is the Void able to think for itself? Can it form strategies? Does it host a podcast? Well, according to this Chozo statue ripoff, the Void is powerful, but not unified. So while it can thrash around at things that come near it, or call out in unison to turn off a light, it's not a single conscious being. Getting back to the Pale King, one could argue that the Void might have played a role in his ultimate demise, and I've argued that viewpoint in the past, but we have to remember that there isn't enough evidence to know for sure. As an expert lawyer and a good friend of mine, Johnny Cochran, once said, "Any evidence that the Void was involved in the Pale King's death is circumstantial. My name is Johnny Cochran." Just above the White Palace, the bugs in the City of Tears weren't faring much better. Even if we ignore the fact that the infection was still around, there were other issues that helped lead to the city's downfall. Due to the gates being sealed, some bugs resorted to cannibalism in order to avoid starvation. And there's also that metric fuckton of corpses lining the walls of the Soul Sanctum. When all was said and done, the only citizen left standing is Eternal Emelita, who just laughs her ass off about it like she's a fucking Dark Souls character. The White Lady ends up in a cocoon deep within the Queen's gardens. She decided to place bindings on herself in order to keep her from spreading her seed. She claims that this is because of the shame she feels in helping the Pale King create the vessels.
I feel warm
but honestly,
hearing that
it's
song.
probably just her kink.
The music.
The White Lady also diminished her power, possibly as a way to keep herself hidden from unwanted visitors. Outside her cocoon, Dryas stood guard, protecting her queen from the violent traitor mantises.
Yeah.
Drya is eventually killed off by these bugs, which is actually pretty pathetic if you think about it. I mean, we're talking like the Netgear WPN824N N150 wireless router pathetic. Speaking of great knights dying pathetically, let's move on to Hagamel. Hagamel held the city crest, a key used to open one of the gates to the City of Tears. At some point, Hagamel's armor shell was stolen by a maggot. Now, maggots were generally looked down upon and forced to do menial labor. They were incredibly weak, and basically deserved all of the discrimination they got. But this one maggot decided to turn the tide, so he stole Hagamel's shell so that he could defend his downtrodden brothers. His actions weren't motivated by the infection, but instead was the result of how hierarchical caste systems will always lead to revolution from the working class, and that true freedom can only be achieved blah blah blah, capitalism is bad, subscribe to my Patreon. Ogrim moved to the Royal Waterways and started living in shit, changing his name to Dung Defender. Now I love wallowing in shit as much as the next guy, but you'd have to really love shit to put up with living with the flukes. The Dung Defender kept an unwavering sense of duty and loyalty to the king, and love for his fellow knights, so much so that he made shit statues of them. How nice. Ogrim acted as the defender of the pipeways, as well as Isma's Grove. A section of the Royal Waterways became filled with acid, and in the middle of it all rests Isma's corpse, which has been overcome by plant life.
How did she
Isma is
die,
likely
I
the one
wonder?
responsible for this acid blight, but we have no idea what happened to her. Hornet's whereabouts during this time are fairly mysterious. We know that she departed Deep Nest and didn't return until the events of the game. At some point, she took to guarding Halnest from intruding warriors, as well as the cast-off shell in the Kingdom's Edge. Despite the Kingdom's woes at large, fortunately this fate did not befall one of the fandom's favorite characters. The Menderbugs continued to fix the broken signs and wayposts of Halnest. From a diary entry, we can see that one Menderbug in particular had found himself on the precipice of a long and loving relationship.
Hello again, diary. Not long now until the next Minder Bash. For us stealthy types, we're a riotous bunch when we get together, and Minderberry kept flashing me that smile. It might be time to muster my courage and act on it.
There
I
was
love
only
my
one
home
Menderbug,
and my
right?
life, but sharing it with another?
I think he was
Why,
only in
that'd be the
Forgotten
berry on
Crossroads.
top.
Greenpath
Maybe
also
wrong.
underwent some changes during this time. The Mosskin were waiting for Un's call, which would bring them back into the dream they were originally born from. But for some reason, Un's strength deteriorated. We don't know why this happened exactly. Was it due
Time.
to the White Lady claiming part of her kingdom? Was it somehow due to the infection? Some Mosskin believe that Un went into hiding, but it appears as though Un is, in fact, calling to her children. But many of the Mosskin are unable to hear or call. Instead, many Mosskin seem to have taken the Radiance's infection into their leaves, which might explain why Greenpath became overgrown with vegetation despite Un's deteriorating powers. Mossy vagabonds even openly chose to forsake Un and worship the Radiance. Another tribe to be screwed over by the Radiance is the Hive, which fell to the infection after the death of their leader, Hive Queen Vespa. But it appears as though this had little effect on their civilization. The Radiance's hive mind was already familiar to the bees, since the hive probably operated under something similar already. So in other words, the hive probably made out the best in this whole situation.
Yeah,
Let's
makes
turn our
sense.
attention back to the moths. After all, it's their god that keeps killing everybody. Well, the moth tribe didn't fare too well actually, as pretty much the entire tribe died out. The only known survivor is the seer. Despite the loss of her tribe, the seer continued to tend to the graves in the resting grounds, while also waiting the arrival of the wielder, a mysterious being that her tribe has dreamt of for a while.
I wonder, I don't know, who gave us the dream nail? Was that Seer? Like the dream version of the Seer? I don't know. Weird.
In the Kingdom's Edge, the land became covered in ash melting off of the worm's decomposing corpse. The Colosseum of Fools continued to thrive. The Lord Fool passed away at some point, but nobody really seems to notice or even care. The fools inside the Colosseum were infected, but still seem to have maintained control over themselves. It seems possible that these bugs took in the infection willingly, similar to the Traitor Lord and his followers. This would have given them an edge in combat, similar to using steroids, but without the whole shrinking testicles thing. However, even the Traitor Lord and his followers went mad, so what makes these fools any more special? As for the Pale King's champion, the Pale Lurker, well, she just went the normal kind of insane.
How do
There
you know
appears
it's
to have
she?
been another unforeseen event with the Pale King's plan. When the Hollow Knight was originally chosen, the door to the Abyss was sealed, trapping the discarded vessels within.
Yeah.
But apparently, some vessels didn't get the memo.
Yeah.
Vessel corpses can be found littered throughout the kingdom.
Yeah.
There's one in the Ancient Basin, one in Green Path, and several trapped in Nosk's lair in Deep Nest.
That as well.
Another vessel that escaped from the Abyss is the
Yeah.
player character,
How did we?
the Knight.
Escape.
The exact details on how the vessels escaped the Abyss is unclear. There are indications that they might have slipped into Deep Nest through some old passageway, given void influences in part of the area, and all the corpses found in Nosk's lair. At some point, all entrances to Hollow Nest were closed off, with the old well and Dirtmouth being the only way to sneak back in. Despite this, several people have wormed their way into the kingdom, with few ever returning. Characters like Relic Seeker Lem seemed content to just pillage artifacts from the ruined kingdom, but other bugs seemed interested in something greater. In the Howling Cliffs rests the corpse of a member of the Grim Troop. The task of this bug
the
appears to
DLC?
have been to seek out Hollow Nest, so that the troop might be summoned to the kingdom in the future. The Grim Troop are basically a group of bugs that serve a higher being known as the Nightmare Heart.
So
The
he
troop
was
keeps the heart alive
a
by
higher
feeding
being.
on the nightmares of fallen kingdoms. This process also involves sacrificing the troop master to his own child because, hey, look at this cool ass boss battle. Another important group that traveled to Hollow Nest are the God Seekers. After being abandoned by their old gods, the gods of thunder and the gods of rain, these bugs left their home in the Land of Storms, seeking out a new god to worship. The God Seekers looked to gods to save them from their own silent mind. While traveling through the wastelands, the God Seekers constructed devices called God Tuners, which helped them seek out new gods.
What?
Through this device, they were able to detect the lingering power of the Pale King and find their way to Hollow Nest. When they arrived, however, the God Seeker was forced into hibernation. She was encased in a strange sarcophagus-like cocoon, which was itself chained up with a lock. It's not clear how this forced hibernation worked, seeing as the cocoon appears to have been made by the God Seeker herself. As for who put the cocoon in chains, I think the most likely candidate is the Dung Defender, considering how the God Seeker's cocoon is found in the junk pit in the waterways, an area the Dung Defender has tasked himself with protecting.
Interesting.
This was the general picture of Hollow Nest after the Hollow Knight was sealed inside the Temple of the Black Egg. The kingdom was stuck in a kind of stasis, with the Pale King civilization destroyed and the Radiance unable to break free from her chains. The Pale King was rebelling against nature, trying to keep his work standing indefinitely. The stasis over Hollow Nest held for an age. How long is that exactly? Well, we have no idea.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you've noticed, there really isn't a timeline for anything that happens in this game. We also have no idea how long any of these bugs can actually live. Elderbug wasn't around to see the stagways open, but we know several other characters were, implying that Elderbug is probably one of the youngest characters in the whole game.
That's so interesting.
But this stasis over Hollow Nest wasn't going to last forever. At some point, the Radiance erupted out of the Hollow Knight, cracking its shell and releasing a loud and powerful roar.
Yeah.
The amount of infection leaking out of the Hollow Knight became even greater. The many corpses that lined the roads and cities of the kingdom sprang to life with the amplified power of the infection. This strengthened infection prompted the departure of the Weavers back to their old home. Now this old home might actually be Farloom, the kingdom in which Hollow Knight Silksong takes place. But the amount of knowledge we have about Silksong right now is pathetic, so I'm not saying that's confirmed or anything. This is also around the
This is
time
first
that
time
Quirrell
seeing
arrives
this
back in Hollow
stuff.
Nest. His memory of Motomon appears to have been clouded due to his time outside of Hollow Nest. These events are depicted in the Quirrell prequel comic, which also shows an image of the Hollow Knight with a pre-cracked shell. This could mean that Quirrell's arrival happens roughly the same time the Hollow Knight's shell cracks. At around the same time Quirrell arrives in Hollow Nest, we also see the arrival of the player character, who is commonly referred to as the Knight. The Knight was one of the lucky vessels that was able to make its way out of the Abyss. Somehow the Knight ended up venturing beyond Hollow Nest and into the wilds beyond. It's implied that the Knight was called to Hollow Nest by either the sealed Hollow Knight or the Radiance within. Regardless, once the Knight shows up and yeets itself off this glyph, the actual game of Hollow
I like to
Knight
believe
finally
that
begins.
was Hollow Knight calling to us.
Now, there's a lot of details we could get into. Hollow Nest is full of NPCs and bosses, each with their own stories
Glah,
to tell.
glah,
But to
yeah.
be honest, I don't think we need to go through all of them, since their stories are relatively straightforward. For example, let's look at the brooding Moloch.
No, let's not.
So why is the brooding Moloch brooding? Because all its friends are dead. And there you go. That's the lore for the brooding Moloch. Also, it's the only character in the game with a visible asshole. Now, did you really need me to explain that to you? Probably not. So instead, I'm just going to talk about the interactions relating to Hollow Knight's main story. The knight is eventually noticed by Hornet, who lures it deep into Greenpath. There, Hornet attempts to kill the knight, claiming that she knows what it would try to do. At this point, Hornet views the knight as being too weak. After the fight, Hornet can be found in the City of Tears, next to the statue of the Hollow Knight. Hornet mentions that the knight has gained a resilience, due to the time it spent in the void beyond Hallownest. This could be referring to the fact that some of those who leave Hallownest lose their memories, meaning the knight would have no memories of its own tragic conception. Hornet tells the knight that if it seeks to continue the stasis that keeps Hallownest standing, it must seek the Graven Ash, which is referring to the Kingdom's Edge. At this moment, Hornet sees the knight as a possible replacement for the Hollow Knight. Basically, the knight could break the seals that keep the Hollow Knight locked away, defeat the Hollow Knight, and contain the infection itself. It's at this point that I should mention that Hollow Knight actually has 5 different endings, because of course At this point that I should mention that Hollow Knight actually has 5 different endings.
The flower? The delicate flower is there in one of them? Huh?
Because of course it would. I'm going to be explaining each of these endings in this video, as they each give us a different glimpse into the mechanics of Hollow Knight's world. Now, to get the easiest ending to Hollow Knight, Hornet's instructions to go to the Kingdom's Edge can be ignored completely. If the knight stumbles upon the resting grounds, the 3 dreamers will appear and cast the knight into the dream realm. There, Seer will come to the knight's rescue and grant it the Dream Nail, a special blade that can tear the veil between the real world and the dream world. With the Dream Nail, the knight can venture to the resting places of the 3 dreamers, curb stomp their asses, and unlock the entrance to the Black Egg. Inside the egg, the knight finds the Hollow Knight chained up, silently watching over it. Once the chains are broken, the Hollow Knight screams with that familiar Radiance roar and pursues the knight. As the fight progresses, the Hollow Knight starts trying to kill itself, Coral style. But then the Radiance starts using the Hollow Knight's body to perform her own attacks. Once defeated, the Hollow Knight begins to spew infection all over the place. The knight can then focus the infection into itself. This results in the first ending of the game, called Hollow Knight. In this ending, the knight usurps the Hollow Knight, prolonging the stasis over Hallownest. New chains and bindings appear out of fuck if I know, and contain the knight, and a new seal is placed over the entrance to the Black Egg. Now there is one giant question looming over this ending. Can the knight actually contain the infection indefinitely, or will the Radiance still manage to break free one day?
Yeah. But to be honest, who knows, maybe he would actually succeed because he wasn't tarnished by the idea instilled or something like that. So maybe he would actually succeed by sacrificing himself to contain the plague. Maybe it would be fine. I don't know.
Infection indefinitely, or will the Radiance still manage to break free one day? Before we answer this question, let's look at some of the other events that can transpire while playing the game. If the player chooses to go to Kingdom's Edge, Hornet will challenge the knight one last time as a final test of strength. After her defeat, Hornet allows the knight to access the cast-off shell, where the Pale King was originally hatched. By interacting with this egg, the knight's shell is marked with the king's brand, technically making the knight the new ruler of Hallownest. With the king's brand, the knight can now open the entrance to the abyss and discover the place of its birth. When leaving the abyss, the knight can encounter Hornet again, where for the first time, Hornet suggests that there are actually 2 outcomes the knight can enact. She tells the knight that it can either prolong Hallownest stasis, or face the heart of the kingdom's infection. Within the knight, Hornet sees a chance for change. Instead of just replacing the Hollow Knight, Hornet believes that it may be possible to get rid of the infection completely by using the void inside of the knight. After visiting the abyss and obtaining the Shade Cloak, the knight is capable of reaching the White Lady, hidden away in the Queen's gardens. The White Lady tells the knight that she has been awaiting a vessel to accept a gift, that gift being 1/2 of a charm called the King's Soul, which she claims will give the knight more power. The White Lady goes on to explain that she can feel the weakening of the Hollow Knight within her roots. She tells the knight that it is free of the blemishes that made the Hollow Knight a flawed vessel. From this dialogue, it is implied that the knight truly is a pure vessel, capable of containing the radiance successfully.
We don't know.
But it's not quite that simple, so we're gonna have to dig a bit deeper into this. Basically, we're gonna need to answer a simple question. What exactly does it mean to be a Hollow Knight?
Yeah.
Despite the White Lady's words, we have a number of
The fuck is
instances where be
that?
a Hollow Knight. Despite the
Steel Soul Jin. It refuses to trade. It has a will all its own. Can refuse. Jin will keep waiting until a gift comes. Is it like the Steel Soul mode where you have new NPCs? Or at least this one?
the White Lady's words, we have a number of instances where the characters and item descriptions mention that the knight has a will, and maybe even a mind. But from the Pale King's dialogue when describing the Hollow Knight, it is stated that a pure vessel has no mind or will. So is the White Lady wrong? Or maybe even lying? Her eyes have been clouded by time, and she can be tricked into thinking that Ogrim is in the room when the knight is wearing the Defender's Crest charm.
Yeah.
She also thinks that Drya is still alive, which... So maybe the White Lady is just senile. My problem with that theory is that the White Lady states that the vessels stand out to her clearly in a misted world, due to them being her spawn. She also questions whether or not the knight sought her aid, which would imply that the knight must have some kind of will. So for whatever reason, the White Lady thinks the knight is still capable of containing the radiance, even if it's still able to make decisions. After all, the Hollow Knight was considered pure, but they still taught it how to wield a fucking sword. I mean, if the knight were truly and completely hollow in a literal sense, it probably shouldn't even be able to walk, or draw a map, or open a goddamn bank account.
Makes you
In
think
short,
about
this
stuff.
whole concept of being hollow is so abstract and hard to define.
Yeah.
I don't really feel comfortable giving a solid answer on whether or not the knight is or isn't truly
That's
hollow.
a choice right
and
here.
I think the game leaves room open for other interpretations.
Yeah.
Of course, the White Lady's gift is useless without the other half of the King's Soul. In order to reach it, however, the knight must travel to the White Palace, locked inside the body of a King's Mold. In order to bypass the seal, the knight must use a fully awakened Dream Nail. It can do this by bringing 1800 essence to the seer, allowing her to sharpen the weapon's blade. If the knight does this, the seer remarks that the knight truly is the wielder that her tribe has been dreaming of. There's no explicit reason why the Moth tribe was dreaming about this supposed wielder so much, but it seems like they believe the wielder would wash away the crimes the Moth tribe committed by turning their backs on the Radiance. The seer seems to know that the knight might kill the Radiance, and she seems accepting of it, ready for her and her tribe to disappear and be forgotten forever.
So sad.
With the awoken Dream Nail in hand, the knight can travel to the Pale King's refuge and locate the other half of the King's Soul charm. When equipped, the King's Soul provides a never-ending supply of soul, making it almost useful if it weren't for the insanely high cost of the charm, and the painfully slow rate at which it increases, and the fact that the charm will get replaced in about 5 minutes after you get it. The King's Soul charm itself symbolizes the union between two higher beings. To me, this implies that the King's Soul is a representation of a vessel, which also was created by the union of two higher beings. With the King's Soul in their inventory, the knight now gains access to an area in the abyss called the Birthplace. In this massive pile of vessel shells, the knight can find a giant egg. Dream nailing the egg allows the knight to access its own memory when it was cast down into the abyss. From viewing that memory, the King's Soul charm is replaced with the Void Heart charm. The recollection of this event allows the knight to come to terms with the
Because I also thought like one egg means one bug. But maybe it doesn't work like that because there's so many fucking vessels there. So maybe one egg because that egg is pretty big. You know, maybe that one egg contains many of them. Maybe we were born from the same egg as Hollow Knight.
void inside itself.
Not
Once
that
the
it
knight has
matters,
the
but-
Void Heart, the shades in the abyss no longer attack it, and that strange creature that gives the knight the Shade Cloak calls it
you
the
can
Lord
talk
of
to it.
Shades. In other words, the knight has now bound the once fragmented void under its own will, allowing it to control the void in a powerful new way. With the union of the void, the Pale King, and the White Lady, the knight has gained a strength before unseen. It is with this charm that 2 additional endings become unlocked. Hornet will now be standing outside of the Black Egg, offering to help the knight should the opportunity arrive. Midway through the fight with the Hollow Knight, Hornet rushes into battle, subduing the Hollow Knight and piercing its shell. It's at this point that the knight is given the perfect opportunity to enter into the mind of its sibling, fighting the source of the infection head on, and finally putting an end to the Radiance's tyranny. Or it can just stand there and let Hornet get knocked unconscious.
Yep.
If the knight finishes off the Hollow Knight as usual, the sealed sibling ending occurs. Basically, it's the same as the Hollow Knight ending, but now Hornet is in the room too, and her face appears on the door of the Black Egg. It's not clear what exactly this means for Hallownest. This might imply that Hornet is now a dreamer, but she's inside the temple, meaning that no one can actually get in there to kill her should the knight ever start leaking infection. At the same time, Hornet mentions that the bindings of the Black Egg would drain her, so she's probably just going to die anyway, right?
Yeah.
Generally, people consider this to be one of the worst endings, but it's worth pointing out that Team Cherry doesn't support any one ending as
all endings are equally canon. We are not into true endings. You choose the path yourself. We'll do our best in all future Hollow Knight content to account for all of them. That is a big thing to say. That is a hard thing to do. Account for all. As long as all the other future games, Hollow Knight games, will be prequels. I don't know. How would that work with all the endings?
being the true ending. Each ending is canonical in its own right, and honestly, this ending isn't the worst. At least the Knight and Hornet will get to spend some quality time together. If the Knight does dream of the Hollow Knight, it will be taken to an arena where it can finally fight the Radiance head-on. But the Knight isn't alone, as the other shades from the Abyss will appear in order to help corner the Radiance. Eventually, the Radiance gets trapped in the tendrils of the Void.
That was my wallpaper for
the
some
Knight
time.
bitch slaps her a couple times, and then the Radiance is consumed into the darkness. The Black Egg then appears to turn to shadows, and the Void seeps down into the ground. Hornet awakens to find the Knight's broken shell lying on the floor. We get one final shot of the Shades in the Abyss going to rest, and the game is over. This ending is called the Dream No More ending. The Radiance is gone, and Hallownest is finally free from her infection. Now I think it's fair to ask a few questions about how the Dream No More ending comes about. When the Hollow Knight was initially chosen to become the pure vessel, the Abyss was sealed up and the rest of the vessels were left to rot away. But somehow, vessels ended up outside of the Abyss, and then one of those vessels was used to replace the Hollow Knight. Exactly how much of this operation was planned, if at all? The White Lady was waiting for a vessel. Did she have any communication with Hornet? Hornet was guarding the King's Brand, the only way for a vessel to enter the Abyss. How did she know it was necessary to guard the King's Brand from weaker vessels? Hell, if the vessels did escape the Abyss by themselves, wouldn't it be pointless to guard the King's Brand, since the vessels could just creep back into the Abyss the same way? I'm not going to provide any good answers to these questions, because God forbid I answer anything in this entire video. But I do want to point out that no plans to actually produce the Dream No More ending are explicitly stated in-game. So we can only speculate as to whether or not the White Lady or Hornet, or maybe even the Pale King, knew that they could defeat the Radiance by creating a Lord of Shades like the Knight. Regardless, the next two endings were definitely not planned. In fact, the last two endings that were added in the Godmaster update almost feel out of place. The Godseekers basically hijack everything to the point where you don't even have to enter the Temple of the Black Egg to beat the game. That's like beating Mario Bros without ever seeing Bowser. But on the other hand, the Godmaster endings basically reinforce that Hallownest does not exist in a vacuum, which can help the world of Hollow Knight feel more real, because what else is reality but just a bunch of random chaotic stuff happening all the time? If the Knight finds the Godseeker in the Junk Pit, it will be able to enter her mind and refight all the bosses in the game. This is part of the Godseeker's ritual. They basically attune to the resonance of gods through ritual combat. This allows them to ascend their minds higher, and eventually, through the use of godly focus, achieve communication with the god sleeping in Hallownest's heart, the Radiance. Now I know what you're thinking. That's a pretty convoluted little religious practice they have going on here. What's next? Are they going to start measuring the Knight's Theon levels? It's pretty complicated, but the point is, these Godseekers have some serious capabilities to fuck things up in Hallownest, as we're about to see. As the night makes it further and further through the 4 pantheons, the Godseekers get closer and closer to making contact with the Radiance, locked away inside the Hollow Knight. At the end of the 4th pantheon, the Radiance makes herself aware in this strange reunion cutscene between the vessels. But she isn't the only one to make an appearance. The Void itself appears to go on the attack, rising up to meet the Radiance's call.
Oh.
It's at this point that the final challenge, the Pantheon of Hallownest, becomes available. The Godseeker finally acknowledges the Knight as being more than just a simple cringer, and they begin to watch the Knight more intently. After defeating like a bazillion bosses in the final Pantheon, the Knight finally comes face to face with the Absolute Radiance, a stronger, more
Seems like
enhanced
hell.
version of the
I'm
game's
never gonna
final
do that.
boss. Finally, the stage is set. After roughly 40 minutes of intense agony and tedious boss battles, the Knight has finally reached the ultimate enemy responsible for the destruction of Hallownest. Truly, this will be a battle for the ages. But first, let's check in on our old pal Menderbug. As it turns out, he's still alive when the Knight arrives in Hallownest, and he's still fulfilling his duty after all this time. Let's take one last look at his diary.
My lovely diary. Someone's gone and broke my favorite sign, right there at the top of the crossroads. Keeps
I know this
happening
voice.
too. But you know, I just can't get mad about it. I should be thanking them.
I watched
really.
his
More
Elden Ring
chances to
videos.
fix that
I cannot
beautiful,
wait to watch
complex
his
sign.
Dark Souls and
And I've stocked
Bloodborne
up on
videos.
spare parts.
I never
so
did.
I've no
I
fear
only watched
it'll ever
Elden
stay
Ring
broken for
stuff.
long.
Unfortunately, the only way to ever
Rati?
read the Menderbug's diary is to kill him in cold blood. I'm not sure why Team Cherry thought this was necessary, but the general consensus on Reddit is that they are bloodthirsty warmongers, so it checks out. But at least Menderbug's last moments will be spent fixing one of his favorite signs in the Forgotten Crossroads. It's comforting to think that his final seconds of consciousness were spent in total bliss, before we sent him hurtling into the infinite chasm that is Oblivion. Well anyways, the alternate fight between the Knight and the Radiance plays out differently than in the vanilla ending. This time around, the Knight is not accompanied by any shades. Instead, after defeating the Radiance, the Knight seems to transform into this monstrosity. Now this creature goes by many names. The God of Gods, the Lord Shade, the Devourer, the Void Entity. But I don't really like any of those, so I will just call him Bill. Bill proceeds to completely annihilate the Radiance in spectacular fashion. We are then treated to the Embrace the Void ending. Bill comes back down from the sky, dropping into the rest of Godhome. The Godseeker starts to get pulled into Bill by Void tendrils. We then cut to the Godseeker in the junk pit. Void starts leaking out of her eyes,
That is
and it
not
appears
fun.
as though Bill is making an escape back into the real world, which is probably a bad thing? Finally, we see Hornet standing outside of the Black Egg as the infection begins to disappear from nearby vines. Hornet hears footsteps coming from inside the Black Egg as the Hollow Knight reveals itself to her and the two prepare for combat. So from this cutscene, we can see that the Radiance's death in Godhome actually did kill her for real, meaning that the infection over Hallownest is now gone. This means the seals inside of the Black Egg probably wore off, allowing the Hollow Knight to escape its prison. In other words, the Embrace the Void ending is a goddamn cliffhanger, and we have no idea how Team Cherry plans to follow this up.
Well,
the Hollow Knight is
probably they
running loose in
don't.
Hallownest, and the
It's
Knight
probably
has
gonna be
transformed
prequel.
into a raging void monster that might try to destroy the entire kingdom, or at least what's
What?
left of it. What's even more strange about this ending is that the announced sequel, Hollow Knight Silksong, doesn't seem to be related to this ending at all. But that's a whole different shit
How do we
show.
know? Is
Obviously,
it a sequel?
the biggest mystery surrounding this ending is the appearance of Bill. Did this creature exist in the void already? Or was it somehow willed into existence by the power of the Godseekers? Did the Knight turn into this thing, or did it just become a part of it?
Yeah, I felt like
Examining a statue of this creature
became
and other
that.
forms of the Knight grant the player a Hunter's Journal entry
This
for
seems
an
like a
ancient
bad
artifact called the
ending.
Void Idol.
Void Idol, rare artifact from a time before Hallownest, its spires twinned in a unified form, unified finally, contains a large amount of liquid from the abyss perfectly still. Inspired or mad, those ancient bugs. They've devoted their worship to no lord or power or strength, but to the very darkness itself. From Lemon.
Which might imply this creature might have been
Lem.
worshipped by the ancient
fuck?
civilization. But again, that's pure speculation. We don't know what this worship of Void exactly looked like. Maybe the void they worship took the form of something more sinister. There is one thing we know about this monster though.
That doesn't look like
It's
a good
weak
ending.
to flowers. Yes, these things. As it turns out, those delicate flowers that Zamir has stockpiled up her ass are actually useful for something. They contain a strange power that even deters the White Lady from touching one. The Godseeker, however, is dumb enough to accept a flower from the night.
Yeah, you
If
did
the
give
player
him
does
that.
this, instead of Void being released out into the world, this flower pulls a no you, and the Godseeker and Void disappear into thin air. The flower itself is described as giving off a pale light, which appears to connect it to the pale beings. Like I said before,
So I guess because I gave the flower to it already, I would not be able to do the... If I would ever to do it, I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't be able to do the fourth, let's say fourth ending, because I already gave it the flower. I would automatically get this one, I guess.
a pale light, which appears to connect it to the pale beings.
Yeah.
Like I said before, pale beings appear to be some form of top-tier gods. As of right now, we are only aware of two, the Pale King and the White Lady, but the fact that Zamir brought these pale flowers from a faraway land implies that there are definitely more of them out there. Another small hint of the existence of pale beings are the pale ore items that can be found all over Hallownest. Did these come from the Pale King, or possibly some other pale being? And what exactly are they? Are they poop? In general, the Godmaster endings appear to be doing a lot of setup for future Hollow Knight content. Like I said before, Hollow Knight Silksong doesn't seem to connect these events on the surface, so we are in a bit of a bind when trying to discuss what these endings actually mean for the greater narrative Team Cherry is
That's
building.
why it takes so long.
There's definitely a lot more to
make
consider about
Silksong.
what the Pale Beings are and what properties they possess. And we also have plenty of questions surrounding the Void and how bugs have interacted with it in the past. It almost feels like we're looking through a keyhole, trying to grasp onto the totality of Team Cherry's creation. How powerful are creatures like Bill and the worms? Where did things like the Void even come from to begin with? How much bigger is the world beyond Hallownest? Is Bardoon into butt stuff? But of course, that's the appeal of a game like Hollow Knight. Having all of the answers
is
to every
Bardoon?
question would just
Weird
ruin the
bug.
mystery of the world. Plus, if we didn't have questions like this to waste our time on, then what else would we be doing with our lives? Go outside? Ugh. And so this video comes to an end. Now I know the average attention span of a YouTube viewer is 9 minutes, so let me leave you with a few takeaways. 1. Hollow Knight is a game about bugs. I know this may come as a shock, but it's true. Watch the video again, and this time, pay attention. You'll notice right away, I promise. 2. Murdering your own babies might not be such a good idea after all. I mean, this is obviously just my interpretation of the game's lore. Other people might have different views on the subject of murdering babies, and every opinion is valid, so I don't want to step on anyone's toes or anything. 3. Menderbug is fucking dead.
Leave Menderbug.
Nothing is certain. This video probably has a few flaws in it. Trying to construct a cohesive narrative with the information found in Hollow Knight isn't exactly straightforward.
It's very much
I'm sure
like
my views will
From
change in the
Software
future,
games.
and I encourage you to explore the lore yourself. 5. And this last point is fairly obvious, but I should mention it anyway. Cory in the House is the best anime.
It's
Got
a
it.
party every week, baby.
Yes, special things.
That's right, I'm in the house.
Alright,
So check it
let's
out.
like the video. Let's like the video and let me do the outro. So yeah, that's the reaction. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. Like this is my first reaction video and I was mostly just focusing on everything that he was talking about, so hopefully it wasn't too boring. Like I said, there are many stuff that I already knew. There are a few stuff that I learned about. There are a few stuff that obviously everything basically from the Godseeker DLC I didn't know because I didn't finish it, so that was very interesting to see. With these type of games, the reason why I love From Software games so much is that not that many things are like canon. I don't know how to explain that, but many things that are in From Software is just basically you have certain information that is given to you, but there are many loopholes that you have to just fill in with your own interpretation. I like to think that my interpretations of the story in, let's say, Dark Souls are not correct or incorrect. It's just everyone has different interpretation of stuff, and no one is right or wrong. And the same kind of goes with Hollow Knight. Obviously, Hollow Knight is just one game, so we're gonna get much more in Silksong, which I'm very excited about to see what type of stuff will be explained for Hollow Knight. But also, obviously, there's gonna be much more new stuff, much more. It's probably gonna be more questions rather than explanations, but that's just how it is with these type of games. But yeah, I enjoyed the video a lot. There was a lot of, like I said, a lot of stuff that I knew. I knew that I thought about, and it was kind of like nice to see that he also had the same opinions or views on the game. And like I said, there was quite a few new things that I didn't know about. There's a lot of Got Home stuff that I didn't know about. The other two endings were very interesting with that whole void creature, which I kind of interpreted it from the video that the knight became that thing, that void thing, finally unified, because before in the video it was talking about how void isn't a single being, how it's not unified, but maybe after it got unified it was because of us and we became that void king or whatever, and that's how we were able to finally defeat the Radiance, because Radiance is light, void is void, darkness, so it made sense that we were this way finally able to defeat Radiance. But this is the most type of like he said, cliffhanger type of ending, because what about the Hollow Knight? The Radiance was defeated. Is he fine? Is Hornet fine? Like, what happened there? Really interesting. I guess even with that ending, we are gone. I mean, we are that void. I wonder how conscious we are. I mean, we don't know how conscious we were from the beginning. So yeah, it's just a lot of things. But this is gonna be it. I think I talked enough. I hope it was an entertaining video to watch. I was really I knew that many people wanted for me to react to this, but I didn't really know if it's gonna be entertaining to watch me react to it, because I knew that I'm gonna be quiet and I'm not gonna be talking much because I had to, focus on what was said in the video. But nevertheless, it was an entertaining video to me, and hopefully you had fun watching it. So yeah, now it's officially done. After this reaction, like I said, maybe in the future I'll be doing some streams about Hollow Knight, about stuff that I didn't do. But until then, we are waiting for Silksong. We are all waiting for Silksong, which hopefully will come out this year. But even if it's not gonna come out this year, don't worry everybody, it will come the next year, probably. Hopefully one day it will come out. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and bye bye.